All right, hello and welcome to our book reading and book launch of Furious Harvests by Alex Averbuch, translated by Oksana Maksymchuk and Max Rosochinsky. My name is Oleh Kotsyuba, and I'm the Director of Publications here at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute. I'm extremely delighted to present today our latest edition, our latest publication, Furious Harvests, by Alex Averbuch in Oksana Maksymchuk's and Max Rosochinsky's translation. This is a collection that transports the readers to Alex Averbuch's homeland of eastern Ukraine. Amid the bloody destruction brought by Russia's war of aggression, the poet toils in fields of memory, reaping lyrics from family archives, mementos to amass testaments to the complex and painful histories of this place and its people. A family tree, letters to home, and the faint scent of the grandmother's dress kept in the back of a closet, to histories of inter-ethnic violence, World War II forced laborers, and the Holocaust. Everything is in there. Mixing dialects, styles, registers, and voices, Furious Harvests, and this is a bilingual edition, defiantly cries out in its rage and longing toward reconciliation of the self and other. I'm extremely delighted that Alex is able to join us today. He is an interdisciplinary scholar, poet, and translator. His poetry has been translated into multiple languages with standalone books published in English, German, Italian, and Polish. He is the author of 4 books of poetry, and he is an assistant professor of Ukrainian literature and collegiate fellow at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Among other things, he is the author of the collection Żydівський Korol, which was the finalist for the Shevchenko National Prize. And English translations of his poems have appeared in Manhattan Review, Coppernickel, Beloit, Birmingham Poetry Review, Words Without Borders, and elsewhere. Allow me to introduce the translators. Oksana Maksymchuk. She is a bilingual Ukrainian-American poet, scholar, and literary translator. With Max Rosochinsky, she won the first place in the Joseph Brodsky Steven Spender translation competitions and was awarded a National Endowment for the Arts Translation Fellowship. For the translation of Mariana Kiyanovska's The Voices of Bob and Yar, also published by us back in 2022, Oksana and Max Rosochinsky were awarded the Scaglione Prize for Literary Translation from the Modern Languages Association of America, the Peterson Translated Book Award, and the American Association for Ukrainian Studies Translation Prize. And finally, Max Rosochinsky, who is a poet, scholar, and translator. Together with Oksana Maksymchuk, he co-edited Words for War, New Poems from Ukraine, published by Academic Studies Press, and co-translated Apricots of Donbass by Luba Yakimchuk, as well as The Voices of Babin Yar by Mariana Kianovska, which I just mentioned. This award-winning work has been supported by the Fritz Thyssen Foundation, Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna, Fulbright Scholar Program, as well as others. I would like to open our event today by allowing the author, Alex, to say a few words about this collection, how this collection came into being, especially given that this is a bilingual collection of his works, just to kind of give us a little bit of a sense of the collection's origins.
Hello to everyone. Thank you, Oleh, for your introduction. Before we begin, this event is a celebration of this book, of a very long process, very long collaboration between me, Max and Oksana, between the publisher, between the designer, and many others who were involved at some stage in the production, either the original book or its translation. But before we begin, I just want to acknowledge that this book largely builds on the current war of Russia against Ukraine. And only yesterday, 27 Ukrainian citizens were killed across multiple regions in Ukraine, and over 120 were injured. So this celebration should be, I guess, somehow contextualized within these events and within the context, the broader context of this disastrous war in Ukraine. The book that we are launching today is has actually three authors. Actually, it has many more authors. I'm not the only one, and I'm probably not the first one to to be mentioned on its cover. I always emphasize that this book is first and foremost the book, the creation of my of the translators who are my co-creators, collaborators, and although as mentioned, this book largely is a translation of the Ukrainian original book, Żydівський Король, which was published weeks before the full-scale invasion. But it also has many more new poems that were written after the Żydівський Король was published, following the full-scale invasion, following the occupation of the part of Luhansk region that I was born. Before the full-scale invasion, this part was not occupied. So many poems that we will read and that were included in the book reflect on the occupation and on the unresolved emotions that are related to both the war, but also to this region that is very much cut from mainland, from Ukraine, from me. To more contextualize the project, it started as a translation and then it moved to a larger, indeed bilingual edition with many poems that appear in this book for the first time. The book has three parts, and we will read from all these parts, heavily based on documentary materials of the Ostarbeiters, correspondents, the forced Ukrainian laborers during the Second World War. These materials are archival materials that I poeticized and decided to include in this book, as well as chapters that reflect on my familial history, multi-ethnicity of Ukraine, and the current war in Ukraine, in particular in eastern Ukraine. So this is in large about the project, and I'm looking forward to read some poems from the book.
Thank you, dear. Thank you, dear Alex. And then I would like to emphasize a little bit the design of this book. This was prepared by Gilad Sutil, and you can see that we didn't spare any kind of special effects on this book to make it a striking collection. It has several illustrations. It has a beautiful bookmark. It's a beautiful paper choice as well. So if you haven't decided yet to get this book, I highly encourage you to get a copy. And I would like to ask the translators to maybe say just a few words about their motivation in deciding to translate this collection. Both of you have participated in several projects that I was privileged to participate in as the publisher, including Words for War, but also Mariana Kianovska's collection of poetry. What is it that attracted you in Alex's poetry?
Thank you so much for being with us today, and thank you so much for supporting the publication. It's been a very long process. So we first started translating Alex's work during the pandemic, I think in 2019, maybe 2020. So as for a lot of these projects, I think temporal duration is something that must come into account when you are trying to explain how you accomplish the thing and why there may be a bit of a variety in the approaches. Perhaps a bit of a polyphony, because with certain projects, you really want the poems to sound uniform and like they're written in a single breath. But because of the specifics of Alex's own approach, it really did benefit from this polyphonous rendition. And there are, as you said, 3 different parts, and there is a multiplicity of voices. So some of the great value of Alex's work is also to kind of merge the literary and the documentary, the personal narrative and the historical one, to kind of blend this distinction between the universal and the very intimate, and truth and truthfulness. And so when you're reading his work, you never quite know who is speaking and to what extent is this an artifice or a document. And that's part of the challenge and the attraction and the puzzle. So we'll be reading some of these very interesting poems in a couple of minutes, and we hope the audience also gets interested and gets pulled into this narrative. And I also want to add that the book is gorgeous, especially the hardback edition, and it's a kind of valuable artifact in itself. So do consider purchasing a copy either for yourselves or as a gift.
Max, would you like to add anything?
Not really. I completely agree with Oksana. Well done. I mean, I would say probably the same thing about truth and truthfulness, and this unique combination of the universal and the particular and the specific individual intimate experience, as well as some traumatic historical events. So that is pretty much it. I mean, drama dwells in repetitions, and we will see a lot of repetitions in this poetry, repetition being used as a device. But also what is specific about Alex's poetry is his use of voices and his ability to shift perspectives. And I think poetry will speak for itself. We will see how it works from the reading.
Wonderful. And this allows me a fantastic segue into our reading portion. So we will begin with our first poem entitled Letter Dated 8/20/43. And so I'm turning this over back to our readers.
Thank you. Letter dated 20th of August, 1943. From your sister Anna. My highly esteemed dear sister Oleh, allow me on the first page of this epistle to kiss my sweet sister on the lips, conveying my sincere, humble tune, and wish you happiness and fortune, and happy life for many years. I am writing verses for you to sing, and remember me through everything. We won't live together, we won't live as two, because we've been split like a star and the moon. Tomorrow in the morning, at the earliest sunrise, the train will arrive at a designated time. My head hanging low, I board the cursed train. Farewell, dear family, I won't see you again. Farewell, dear family and faithful friends. I'm leaving for good. This is where it ends. Germany, Germany, a distant land. My dear mother will weep for her lad. She will cry for me, and she will mourn, waiting for her young son to return. Where did he go, handsome stallion? Where did he go, my young dear son? On the streets of Uman, girls are joyful and merry, but I'm sent off to the faraway Germany. My dear little sister, I'll come back home when those who torment our people in Ukraine get lost. When they're off, gone back to their own kin, that's when I'll come back and tell you everything.
I think we're moving to our next poem. Also a letter to Elizaveta Petrichenko from Marussia Boychuk. Letter written on 14/7/43. I am writing this letter to my dear Papa, Mama, from your daughter Manya. Good day, my beloveds. I send you my sincere and wistful greeting, and I wish you to live as long as possible in Ukraine, and that I may see you again as soon as possible. Sending my heartfelt hello to my brother, my nieces, and to my maidenly sister Poля. Also, your granddaughter and niece Marusia sends her sincere greetings. I inform you that I am alive and healthy, but I wouldn't wish such a life unto you. For you I wish to live your best life and to see us again. Now I will tell you about my life. We live as before and work in the same camp at the factory, just as we used to. These days, every Sunday, they let us go out into the woods. There is nowhere else to go. In the forest, there are raspberries and blueberries, so we gather them. Sometimes, if we ask the police, they even let us to go to the woods on working days. At the moment, the weather here is very bad, rain and more rain, and it doesn't stop. If there is no rain for a day, that's very good. Well, you asked if we bought anything. No, but I wrote about what they bought for me. I am usually wearing my old clothes, and there is nowhere to get new ones. They are paying us a little more money now, but mostly it's all nothing, just empty promises. My dear ones, we haven't seen anything yet, neither the fruit nor the bread. We sowed and planted, didn't even notice. When anything bloomed, we just sit and cry. Haven't received any parcels. When you send anything, let us know how much, and don't send us anything other than dried fruit, onions, and garlic, because we can't live just on wheat rusks. Now, you asked about vacation. It's been over a year, but nobody tells us anything, neither about going back home nor a vacation. Maybe, God willing, when the war ends, we will come back. I implore you, write letters and describe everything about how you are faring. Has Vasya grown tall? Do you still have a cow and horses and everything? I miss it all, lots and lots. It's been over a year. In another letter, I'll try to send you a picture of us once I have it. I am also letting you know that this very night we received 2 parcels, Manya and I. I got some wheat rusks and Manya seeds and stockings. We thank you very much, but please don't send any more wheat rusks. Send onions, garlic, seeds, and dried fruit. So goodbye for now. And we also ask you, if you have any millet or cereals, please send us some.
Maybe before I will read the next poem in the original, I will make another comment on this cycle, which is very dear to my heart. These are real letters that my function as an author or co-author was to find the most poetic segments, lines in those letters, and to arrange them in a more poetic form. They were already very, very poetic, but I couldn't resist to co-create with them 70 years ago and today. And I will read this last poem from the chapter, which is my favorite one. Лист писаний 18 сентября. Лист от твоєї сестри Каті до своєї сестри Гані і племеннички Галочки. Здрастуйте, мої рідні, завіщаю я вам, що я поки жива і здорова, і вам желаю, сеструні моя Таночко, звіщаю я то всім, що я вже получила від тебе 4 відкритки, за котрі тобі щиро і щиро дякую, що ти за мене не забуваєш. то я за тебе не забуду ніколи. Сестронечко моя Таню, ти мені пишеш, щоб я тобі написала, де я знаходжусь. Я знаходжусь в городі Германії, недалеко польської границі, 25 кілометрів. І ще ти писала ти мені, що я роблю, сеструню. Я роблю в хозяїна всяку роботу. І вдома, і в полі даю коров, і свиням даю. Общем, сеструню Таню, описати тобі всю роботу свою, то треба багато бумаги. А ще писала ти мені, в чому я ходу. Мені пані купила одне плаття, і одну сорочку, і одні труси, і більш поки нічого. І ще писала ти мені, де я сплю. Я сплю в чистому, їсти теж дають. І поки ще так і не хорошо, і не плохо. Сама ти знаєш, я в чужій стороні жити. Нема кому що сказати, а я тобі всього не можу описати. Що можу, то опишу. Як дасть Бог, повернусь, тоді все розкажу. Ну і пока. Все. Передавай всім привіт. Дівчатам і хлопцям, і тіткам, і сусідам, і сеструні Дуні, і Гані, і Колі, і Миті, і Маріні. Нехай вона напише мені ходно письмо. І Парасі, і Федорі. Нехай вони напишуть мені письмо. І Ксені, і Вані, і Домці, і бабці Ларіоновні, і Марфі, і Колі. Благодару їх, що вони за мене не забувають. І цілую вас всіх в розові губки. І з тим до свидання. Привіт всім від Каті.
And here is the translation. Letter written on September 18th, a letter from your sister Katya to my sister Tanya and to my little niece Haluchka. Greetings, my dear ones. I am letting you know that I am still alive and well and wish the same for you. My dear sister Tanya, I inform you with this note that I've already received 4 postcards from you, for which I sincerely and warmly thank you, that you don't forget about me, as I will never forget about you. My dear sister Tanya, you asked me to write to you where I am, and I'm in a town called Germany, not far from the Polish border, some 25 kilometers. You also asked me what I do, my dear sister. I work for the master, and I do all kinds of work, at home and in the field. I milk the cows and feed the pigs. Sister Tanya, if I were to describe to you all my work, it would take a lot of paper. You also ask what clothes I wear, so it's like this. The mistress brought me 1 dress and 1 shirt and 1 pair of underwear, and nothing else so far. You also ask about where I sleep. I sleep in the house on clean sheets, and they provide me with food. And for now, it's neither good nor bad. You know how it is to live in a foreign land with no one to speak a word to. I cannot describe everything to you, but I'll describe what I can. And if I return, God willing, I'll tell you everything. Well, for now, that's all. Send my regards to all the girls and the lads, to the aunts and to the neighbors, and to Sister Dunya, Hanya, Kolya, Maitya, and Marina. Let her write me a letter, at least one, also to Parasya and Fedora. Tell them to write me a letter, to Ksenia and Vanya and Domka, and to grandmother M. Larionovna, and to Marfa and Kolya. I thank them for not forgetting about me, and I kiss you all on your rosy lips. And with this, goodbye. Greetings to everyone from Katya.
All these letters, as well as poems or letter poems, are about longing, dreaming about return to Ukraine, which was prevented from these millions of Ukrainians. Around 3 million of Ukrainians were taken to the slavery works. The next poem will be from a different section, but it also deals with longing and the anxiety, the fear of of this inevitable threat of non-returning to the place you were born. Як повернутися до міста, якого нема? Додому. Як повернутися, якщо його, як горя, важкого нема? Перейменовані вулиці, наче розпухлі судини, не знаходять місце впадіння. І ти стоїш по горло в цьому павуткові, плутаєшся, чим відчинити йому двері, ключиком на мотузці, який загубив у сонливому метушінні, за пазухою, і не знайти його у цій вирві, у смужках запотілої тканини чи паперу, наче у самому серці гірських порід, де навіть обвали не розкривають повітрю внутрішню будову гір. І нарешті увійти, увімкнути світло, але не бачити затуманілих облич, вимикнути і не бачити, як постарішав, наважитися запитати, врешті-решт, як я помер. Густий, духмяний пил оточує розбещену пам'ять. І лягти у ліжко, щоб прокинутися 35-річним. У домі, у ліжку, обмацюючи руками, губитися, шукати вільного місця поруч мовчазних дідів, поки тобі не сказали, стрімким падінням ґрунту на зморщене, незадоволене обличчя. Збирайся, збирайся, але ти вже не розумієш, що це не до тебе. Питаєш, любі мої, де я маю бути тепер? Де прощаються нині з собою?
How do you return to a town that does not exist, to a home? How to return when it no longer exists like a heavy sorrow? Streets with changed names, swollen vessels that can't find an estuary. And you stand in this flood up to your throat, getting mixed up how to open the door with the key on a string that you'd lost, sleepily fumbling. Under your shirt, you can't find it now in this whirl, in the ribbons of damp fabric or paper, layered tightly as rock strata, where even a landslide would not expose the interior of a mountain. Finally, to go in, turn on the light and still not see the fucked up faces, turn it off without noticing how you'd aged, daring to ask at last, how did I die? Thick, fragrant smoke encircles pampered memory, and you lie down in bed to wake up as a 35-year-old. In that house, in that bed, feeling around, you get lost, looking for space amidst the sullen ancestors, until you're told, with the sudden falling of soil onto a wrinkled, contorted face, get ready, get ready. And not yet realizing that it isn't addressed to you, you ask, my beloveds, and where am I to go now? Where does one say goodbye to oneself these days?
Про тіло, міцно скручене, добре пригнане. Про вухо туге, про мігби наосліп, про як з язика зняли, про добробут, який стає дибки, про рівновагу, яка втрачає себе, про тіло розчахнуте, повне безладних частин, про нього. Боже, доки триматимеш язик за зубами, скільки носитимеш ніч за плечима, якщо ранок не розуміє твого мовчання, якщо подія не має кінця, якщо крики мої полонені, а сади повні каміння. Скільки рухів тілу лишилося до краю домівки, якщо всі вулиці поневолено, а домашні ховаються у корінні містечок. скільки ще разів їх не вбито, якщо птахи вкотре летять у зворотному напрямку, а обличчя сусідів давно на виворіт. Про тіло і його частини, про голі кістки і висохлу шкіру, про пусті очі, про відірвані руки, про вирвані нігті, про збентежене тіло від російського погляду, про кожну тремтливу клітину, що не витримує дотику спогадів, про день, що обертається навколо себе, про час, що не витримує очікування, про вітер, який посічено сиренами, про хвилі відчаю, що вишкрібають мілини жаху. Скільки молитов нам лишилося, аби і твої вуха різало. Скільки обрубкуватих осель має зажовкнути спілими яблуками, аби і твої очі пекло. Про тіло, яке не пригадує слів, про очі, що відмовляються бачити бездиханність, про пам'ять, що задубіла від люті, про око за око, про очі за око, про 1000 за одне, про сивий, розпатланий ранок, про тіло за тіло, про 1000 за одне, про зотліле зерно, вічну пам'ять, про вічне життя.
And a translation. Oh. About the body, tightly twisted, well fitted, about a hard-hearing ear, about I could have done it blindly, about it just slipped out of my mouth, about while being turned upside down, about balance that loses itself, about the body torn up, full of messy parts, about them. God, how long will you keep your mouth shut? How long will you carry the night on your shoulders? If the morning does not understand your silence, if the event is endless, if my steps are captive and the gardens full of stones, how many steps remain to the edge of the dwelling? If all the streets are captured and loved ones hiding in the roots of towns, how many times have they not yet been killed? If the birds again fly in the opposite direction, and the faces of neighbors have long since been turned inside out, about the body and its parts, about bare bones and dry skin, about empty eyes, about torn off arms, about ripped out fingernails, about the body alarmed by the Russian gaze, about every quivering cell that cannot stand memories, about the day revolving around itself, about time that cannot stand expectation, about the wind that is cut by air raid alerts, about the waves of despair scraping the shallows of horror. How many prayers do we have left so that your ears hurt too? How many dwellings must be chopped to stumps, their kitchens exposing the yellow of ripe apples, so that your eyes would burn too? About a body that fumbles for words, about eyes that refuse to see lifelessness, about a memory numbed with rage, about an eye for an eye, about eyes for an eye, 1,000 for one, about the disheveled gray morning, about a body for a body, 1,000 for one, about smoldering grain, eternal memory, about eternal life.
So maybe this is a good place to kind of talk a little bit about the two different cycles before we continue. If Alex, if you could maybe say a few words, kind of in the first cycle, or the first part from which you read, contains, as you mentioned, real postcards written by Ukrainian Ostarbeiters from Nazi Germany, where they were forcibly moved to for labor, right? And what's interesting about that is that the language itself is very much alive in those. It's not poetic language as such, it seems. and there is a lot of irregularities in how it's written, and yet it's of course full of pain, full of longing. And if we compare this to the poetry in this cycle from which you're reading right now, the question, so kind of what struck me at least is this the presence of this foreign gaze in the previous in the kind of the written from Germany cards. It seems like there's this penetrating German gaze, right? There's the mention of the clothes that the German masters bought for the forced laborers. There is the mention of certain conditions and so on. So you can feel that kind of that gaze, that participation. And in this particular poem that we just read, to me as striking was the presence of the Russian gaze, right? Also as something deeply penetrating and unsettling. How do you yourself kind of try to perhaps reconcile this very two different periods, modes of projecting voice?
So first of all, about the Gastarbeiter cycle, I appreciate very much in these documents the rawness of the language, the Surgic. This is a pure Surgic, and I see in the audience Lada Balanyuk, so she understands me probably better than anyone else. Surgic is highly poetic, transgressive, mixing various registers and folklore, popular culture, grammatical rules violated as well. But this third reader, or this gaze of the censors, or just those who were overseeing these people, I think it's a different gaze from what I was speaking in my lyric poem, the last that we read, because the German gaze in these poems is very much mundane, and it is very much known to the those who write these poems, these letters, and those who lived in these circumstances. They became accustomed with the expectations, with what they were surveilled for. And this is why these poems, these letters, are very much poetic, because poeticality is not only about the highly emotional periods of time, highly emotional moments that these people went through, but also, I would argue, because they wanted to metaphorically code their messages, and what this pragmatism essentially became very much poetic. In the last poem, The Russian Gaze, I think it's more about the potential of this gaze, the anxiety of being seen, and being seen is being ruled, also being defined, being targeted. And this is kind of anxiety that I was talking about, something rational, but also when experienced by through body, not only emotions, it becomes a threat.
Thank you. And this obviously presents a particular difficulty for the translator, right? And so maybe Oksana and Max could speak a little bit more about how to render this kind of speech into English, right? What kind of to begin with, what are the devices available to us to try and transport the same connotations in translation, and whether or not it can even be made possible.
We get asked about this quite a bit, so I can begin, and Max, if you want to chime in, you're welcome to. So the originals are written in a dialect of Ukrainian that is associated with being somewhat illiterate, and so there are a lot of orthographic errors. There are some grammatical oddities, spelling mistakes. We decided that if we were to use a dialect in the English language, this would be necessarily a matter of appropriating a dialect of a similar group of disadvantaged semi-illiterate peasant class in either England or United States. And so this would be problematic because the context would be so incredibly different. And so we decided that instead of taking an already existing dialect, we are going to treat this dialect as its own separate language. So instead of treating it as a deviation from the norms you would, of course, be aware of as a speaker, an educated speaker of Ukrainian in the 21st century, we decided to focus on the music, the phonetics, the melody, the kind of the mood, the tone of the poems, rather than emphasizing the extent to which they, you know, they belong to members of a certain class. We thought that we are just going to emphasize the humanness of these kinds of voices who are, as Alex was saying, trapped in this situation where all they can do is long for the motherland. And another poignant aspect of a lot of these letters is that they often came home to destroyed villages, so the recipients often couldn't respond to them. And often the writers didn't return. Or if they returned, they would be sent to Siberia or to the labor camps because they had they were considered impure through having labored under Nazis and worked for the Nazis as collaborators. And so there is this tragic dimension about the voices that we felt would be distorted if we were trying to be too crafty and too technical about how to render them.
Yeah. Max?
Yes, thank you so much. It is not only a matter of distortion, but also a matter of evaluative judgment. Even asking the question, what would be the difference between an illiterate person and the person speaking a dialect from some perspective of an empire that actually considers dialect as the speech of an uneducated illiterate person. Poetry is an art of appropriation. And here the poet, the author, is walking on the not across, but on a tightrope, not across the thin, narrow line, actually preserving a lot of those dialects, a lot of those idiosyncratic nuances. They do not get translated because to translate them would be to add another layer of evaluative judgment that we would rather want to avoid. Because matching dialect would be impossible, but also there is this question of literacy versus illiteracy, dialect versus a language that is already there and might be explained in the comments, but not in the actual translation.
Wonderful. For me, I'm to be honest, this I find it extremely touching in the way that Alex elevates these voices, right? Because to take them and to include them as poetry in your collection, right? Kind of projecting those voices, but also kind of blending your voice with them. It elevates this. It exactly kind of counteracts what Max has been describing, the potential for dismissal, for being perceived as something lower, second grade, and so on. And so I feel that it really strongly works against it. And on top of that, this was one of the main reason that pushed me to consider publishing this as a bilingual edition rather than just a English translation, right? Because all of this would have been lost, not entirely, obviously, because the tone, as Oksana has mentioned, maybe like the gesture or the rhythm have been preserved, but a lot of these idiosyncrasies that are in the text itself would be lost. So we are already in the part of the collection that speaks about the present war that started in 2014, and Alex himself is from the part of Ukraine that is currently occupied. His town, Novaydar, is also occupied, so we're gonna be moving more in that direction. But before we go there entirely, I wanted to ask Alex about the connection between the kind of the three major themes of the collection, right? One of them is war, and there is so the war of the World War II, kind of the other big war. The second one is the present big war. But kind of through all of this and in between is the kind of the question of connection to identity, to previous generations, to people whom you love, who you miss, so there's the sense of loss and so on. So I wanted to ask you how, in your mind, this kind of the wars echo each other in the type of the kind of the feeling of loss and longing that you can see in the parts that talk about your family history, your family trees, the various kind of combinations of genetic material almost, right? And kind of, all of this, how does it kind of in your mind connect in this collection?
Well, it's difficult to talk about how it is connected in my mind. Maybe it will be another point, but I think in these two cycles and also the next one that we will be reading is about an attempt to reconcile the past with the present, or maybe not to reconcile, to look for parallels, for assonance, for people from the past who might resemble people from the present. And you mentioned my loved ones, and indeed the Judivsky Korol speaks largely about my familial history, but emotionally, I'm very much attached to these letters. I love all the writers of these letters. I can imagine them physically. I can almost hear their voices. So the appropriation, the poetic appropriation, the sin of poetic appropriation that I have committed, and then I also involved my translators and you into this crime as well, was out of this desire to both work with unique texts, but also to correspond and to talk to people who otherwise would not be able to reveal their stories. And we know about the Ostarbeiters' history, that it is a very sad one, especially upon their return to the Soviet Union. And also the connection, as I see it now, one of the main threads of that connect these cycles, as well as the Ned's book, is this condition of living under occupation. This became a central topic to my writing, and as you heard, the last poems were entirely on that, as well as the next one. So the issue of occupation, the stigmatization, both we mentioned the stigmatization of the Ostarbeiters by the Soviet government, some parts of Soviet population, mistrust is in a way repeating itself also in the occupied territories of, in particular, of Donbass. So this attempt to show a different side of this discourse is important. And since you don't have,
I wanted to say, kind of to interject, for me, like if we're looking for a term, I think kind of rehumanizing these people, it's maybe the term to try and capture this, because the level of dehumanization that, you know, that we observed for the World War II Osterbeiters, and as well as, you know, the level of dehumanization that, you know, is currently happening as well, you know, I feel is comparable. So you are rehumanizing them by kind of centering them. Alex, I'm sorry, Max, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I would not put it in the terms of humanization and dehumanization. There might be a trade-off. The question is, who has a right to represent and takes it upon himself? Definitely the poet, definitely the author. This representation inevitably comes with either appropriation or distortion. We can call it any names. But if that distortion and appropriation never happens, the letters remain in the archives, and perhaps poeticizing them is the only way to actually bring them to light, to our attention, and to represent what otherwise would not be represented.
That's right. And the reason for my asking this question, there's another reason, is that if we look at other Ukrainian poets, such as Mariana Kianovska, for example, that we have mentioned today, she also started, she thought, writing poetry about the ongoing war, right? The war that started in 2014, but ended up writing a powerful collection about the massacre at the Babin Yar in 1941, right? And so kind of I feel that there is a lot of affinity there, and also in what you are doing with this beautiful postcards. Okay, so without further ado, let's proceed to the second block of reading. And I would like to invite everyone to think about their questions. You have a unique opportunity to ask both the author and the translators some pointed questions about this poetry, about the translations. So please take advantage of this unique opportunity. Okay, and we are proceeding with the next block, the second block of readings.
which is connected to the first one, obviously, and it is also about the Eastern Ukraine, and in this case, about Novaidar, that I was born, and the events that are described in the next poem are real events about a hospital, a children's ward in the Novaidar hospital where I was born, where during the war after 2022, the Russian soldiers were hiding, and this hospital was shelled by the Ukrainian forces, and the Russian soldiers, almost all of them were killed. And since it happened, and you mentioned Oleh town, Novaidar. Novaidar is actually a village of, well, now probably around 5,000 people. So everyone knows everyone, and I know also, despite the big demographical changes in the region since the invasion. And I wrote a poem about this event, a bit, if we were speaking about rehumanization. So maybe this poem is, quite an opposite from rehumanization. And it is called Russian Soldiers Are Resting. Російські солдати спочивають. Російські солдати спочивають у ліжечках дитячого корпусу Новоайдарської лікарні. Пухленькі, мутанти велетні, сповиті у пелюшки мого дитинства, російські солдати кирзаками вибивають кордони наших затісних колисок. Витягуються роззявляють пащі, просять каші і гречі вдень і вночі, смокчуть нафтові соски, пердять природним газом далеко від Костроми і Рязані. Російські солдати у вісні скрикують: «Матушка, батюшка, Боже, царя храни, велика страна моя родная, победа, один народ, нефть, газ, балет, розхристані, безголові, безрукі, ніби розтрощені ляльки моїх тіток, якими грався у дитинстві, російські солдати не дають собі ради. Хто ними бавитиметься тепер? Хто вдягне у светрик, натягне спідничку, пришиє відірвану голівку, вкрутить в пусте тільце ручки та ніжки? Розкидані по лабіринтах дитячого відділення Новоайдарської лікарні, таких безкінечних і темних, таких совєтських, таких моїх. Це туди прабаба Рахіля, велика, глуха, руда жінка, принесла мене у вересні 85-го на таємне обрізання. Це там я обіцяв лікарці, що зроду не бачила такої піпіськи обличчя. У лабіринтах дитячого відділення Новоайдарської лікарні на стендах великі шприци, язикотримачі, клізми, затискачі, ікони Леніна і Кравчука, і ще якогось беззубого хлопчика. Усім трьом я молився, аби у мене не було карієсу і до 12 років не їв солодкого. Велике і темне, як церква Московського патріархату, дитяче відділення дитячої лікарні і дитячого Новоайдару мало два дитячі поверхи. На першому, зігнувши навпіл крихітне тільце і стягнувши штани, робили зішкріб на гостриків. На другому, на холодне і прозоре, як дитячі спогади, скельце вичавлювали з мізинчика крапельки крові. А нині у дитячих ліжечках дитячого відділення Новоайдарської лікарні у визвольному перегарі під обламками імперської турботи спочили російські солдати. І жодного беззубого хлопчика не зачепило, кажуть місцеві, що бачили у дитячому відділенні мого королівства. Спокій і темну ніч, прозоро, як зраду, як дзюркотіння в очі, як Божу росу, як слинявий поцілунок сусідів, як згарище перешкод перед осліплими від люті туги.
Russian soldiers arresting. Rocket strike at the children's ward of the Novaidar hospital. Russian soldiers are resting on cots in the children's ward of Novaidar hospital. Chubby giant mutants wrapped in the diapers of my childhood. Russian soldiers in their torpling boots break the boundaries of our too narrow cradles. They stretch, they open their mouths, they ask for kasha day and night, day and night. They suck oil from baby bottles and fart out natural gas. Far from Russian soldiers cry out in their sleep, Matu, batyushka, God, my Oleh, disheveled, broken dolls, my aunts that I used to be a child. The Russian soldiers are at a loss. Who will play with now? Who will put a sweater on them? Wool a skirt on them? Sew back the torn off head? Screw the hands and legs into the empty body? Scattered throughout the labyrinths of the children's ward of the Novaidar hospital, so endless and dark, so Soviet, so mine. That's where my great-grandmother Rahila, a large deaf red-haired woman, brought me in September 1985 for a secret circumcision. That's where I pissed on the face of the doctor who had never seen such a wee-wee. In the labyrinths of the children's ward of the Novaidar hospital, there are stands with big syringes, tongue clamps, and nets, and did not eat until I was 12. Big and dark at the church of the Moscow Patriarchate, the children's ward of the children's hospital in the children's Novaya Dar had two children's floors. On the first, you were bending your tiny body in half and pulling down your pants. They scraped you for pinworms. On the second, on a glass as cold and transparent as childhood memories, they squeezed out from your little finger drops of blood. And now on cots of the children's ward of the Novaya Hospital, with the stale reek of liberation on their breaths, and under the wreckage of imperial solicitousness, Russian soldiers went to their rest. And no toothless boy was killed, say the locals, who saw. In the children's ward of my kingdom, peace and dark night, transparent as treason, as a jet of pee in the eyes, as the spit of God's dew, as the slobbery kiss of our neighbors, like an obstacle course for those blinded by rage and longing.
Thank you, and please, to those who join us, please be mindful that we're doing this in a transatlantic fashion, and so the internet sometimes freezes up a little bit. So that's why we have the text there for you as well. So thank you for your understanding. Okay, and let's continue.
Okay. Hope I will not have any problem with sound. We are one-on-one, you, unbearable God of mine. Because of you, the righteous will perish alongside the godless. We are the people. Come to you in the night. Open your doors. My God, let us go. This city is too close to flee to. How mournful this flight with drums and congenital disorders, for our name is Wu. Our mouths filled with brick dust shout of the heaviest hours. I must swallow this hunger, for there is no grave we wouldn't bring along, for there is no pillar of salt that we wouldn't look back at. We are the salt of this earth hurled into your eyes.
I take it I was getting frozen, so let's hope this is better. He wasn't there alone. He was drawn to his own. They stood on the other side of the river, barely touching the soil, and pointed with slow gestures in the direction of the east. Across it, like the muted noise of to the stream, muddied it ran following fish and tangle to the great land, guiltily turning back to glimpse the foggy banks of Aidar, the reeds, their tops filled with umber sorrow, dully struck one another, sprinkling tight clumps of down over the water. Like the past you must shuck off somehow over your own self, like apples that refuse to roll away from the tree, no matter how hard you kick them. Like the primal names here, pick it up, yet here you remain standing, a wild apple tree, reaching with its last living root for the abyss that is its home.
Maybe if I may add a short comment about this poem. This one was written right after the invasion, the first poem after 2022, February 2022. And it speaks about this emotional stance when you you understand that this land is cut with all the people that were left there, but you still lean towards them. You still have this spiritual connection to the land and to its people, which is once again central to this book and to the next one. And it speaks about the river Aidar that we have in Nova Aidar. And it imagines this war as the river that cuts between them and us. And often we think about them as them, but often they are us as well. So it's about this inevitability of escaping from your origins, I guess.
Yeah. Max, we cannot hear you. Yes, try again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you.
I want you to remember, so that in the fever of your holy daydreaming you would see everyone at once, dressed in body, strung on dry bone, how you let the worms into the womb, how the roots of the frenzied tree stored the swollen lungs, how you bound hands with wire like on the Day of Atonement. In your sleepless holiness, I want you to hear, to the very end of your being, this bewildered, unbearable scream. I want you to see how you raised luscious grass in the fragile chest instead of the hardened heart, how you fed the eyes to the mass graves. You've erred again, for the stubborn lips soon to the gravestone grown lost their will to pray to your wilting attention. You've erred yet again, having thrown onto the cellar floor the wrong people in the wrong place. You've been wrong, time and again. When the voice, stained with white rust of your trial, swallowed the last words, how do you rest? Now and in all eternity, when you hear us call your name, how do you hear? The sky can no longer bear your yawning, torn to pieces of human despondency. What do you see from the throne of your indifference? And also, tell how to pray to your weariness from now on.
I think we can skip the original of this poem. Maybe we can move to the last section of the book,
Okay.
which was the core of the original book, and it deals with my private history, which I think, especially in this upcoming poem, is very much a typical Ukrainian family story of ethnic intermix and all the outcomes of that. So the next poem is, Oksana, would you like to read it? Do you want me to read it?
Could you hear me okay last time I read?
Now we can hear you well.
We can hear you well. Yes, we have some freeze-ups, but let's try again.
Okay. Well, okay. Because if it's not working, then maybe you can read the translations from now on. I forgave myself for my Ukrainian great-grandfather who joined a pogrom against my Jewish great-grandfather. I forgave my Polish great-grandmother, who tore at the braids of my Jewish great-great-grandmother. I forgave myself for my Moscow great-grandfather, who took the last bit of food from my Ukrainian great-grandmother. I forgave my Jewish great-grandmother, who informed on my Ukrainian great-grandfather. They're all here now at the last supper of my body, leaning on the table. Each of them pulls at my heart, rises up, carves out a slice, trots it out. Look, this is ours. And I have no time to ask with my every torn piece, why am I on the line? Eat my flesh in memory of yourselves. Drink of me, dearly beloved grandma, grandpa.
And the last poem is goes even deeper than the one that Oksana just read. It is called The Book of the Generation of Alexander, which I'm tempted to read in the original, but since we are approaching the end of the session, maybe we will keep it only in the translation.
No, I think we still have time, and it's yeah, and you know, rhythmically, I think it's very interesting, so it definitely deserves to be read in original.
Окей. Книга родоводу Олександрового, сина Давидового, сина Авраамового. Авраам породив Ісаака, Ісаак породив Якова, Яків породив Юду і братів його, Юда ж породив Фареса, Тазару від Тамари. Фарес же породив Ісрома, Ісром породив Арама, Арам породив Амінадава, Амінадав же породив Наасона, Наасон породив Салмона, Салмон же породив Вооза від Рахави. А Вооз породив Йовіда від Рути, Йовід же породив Єсея, Єсей породив Давида, Давид же породив Лейзера від Басшеви Буріхови у Чорткові, а Лейзер породив Ісраїля від Сари в окопах Святої Трійці. І як народився Баал Шем-Тов, то було батькам його по 100 років, і не мали вони, окрім нього, дітей, померли, як Бештові 5 рочків було. І вештався він по хащах, шукаючи Бога, аби задобрити його, і, знайшовши, породив від хани Малки у бродах Цвігірша та Аделю. Аделя ж породила Фейгу від Єхіеля Ашкеназі з Тульчина. І були в них ще Мойше Хаїм, Борух Шмуль та Ян Кільйов. Фейга ж породила у Меджибожі Нахмана, а той Нахман із Братслава породив від Сашії Єфраймової Аделю, що породила від Йоськи Авербуха з Хмельника, Авраама Дова Бера. Авраам Дов Бер же породив Дувіда в Чигирині. Дувід же породив Боруха від Ліби Товби з Медведівки. І тоді вже народився від Борога Ісосі Сури Аронової в Бершаді Герц. Герц же породив Дувіда, Боруха, Рахілю, Шейну та Зислю від сини Бенюмінової у Дашові. А Рахіля породила Луїзу Людмилу від Віктора в Донецьку. Віктора ж породив Карл Освуд з Менонітів в Новгородському. Луїза Людмила ж породила Наталю від Володимира Богуславова з Кракова, що з неї родився Олександр. А усіх поколінь від Авраама аж до Давида 14, а від Давида аж до переселення в Україну та великого змішання поколінь 14. Народження ж Олександра сталося так. Ще до того, як його матір заручено з Михайлом з Новайдару, та перш ніж зійшлися вони, виявилося, що вона має в утробі Олександра. А Михайло, не бувши праведним, ославив її і не прийняв її, бо не хотів Олександра, зачатого від нього. А Наталя хотіла вродити сина і дати йому ймення Олександр, щоб він захистив її і не ославив більше. І як прокинулася зо сну, то зробила, як звелено їй, і не позбулася його, і не вискребла. І не знав Олександр в подяку матері своїй, батька свого, Михайла Володимирового, ані діда свого, Володимира Костянтинового, ані бабу свою, Ніну Миколаєву, ані сестру свою кровну сліпу не знав і не бачив ніколи, як вони жили у Ростові на вулиці Єрьомінка, 82, квартира 803. Як щоранку ходив на роботу батько його, цього він не бачив і не знав. Як сестра в темних окулярах виходила з жінкою під руку, не бачив і не знав їх ніколи. І спитав себе, хто згрішив, вона чи батько її, що сліпою народилася? Вона не згрішила, бо не знала, що батько вчинив. Промовив це і допоміг зціленню сліпої. Отож подалася та, куди казав їй, і повернулася зрячою. Сусіди ж і ті, що бачили її раніше сліпою, заговорили, чи то ж не та, яка ото все в окулярах ходила? І вона сказала, це я. Тож питались її, як воно так, що прозріли твої очі? А вона, чоловік, що братом моїм назвався, на поміч прийшов та й мовив, піди та зроби. І я пішла та зробила, що казав він. Вони її тоді питають, де він? Не знаю, каже та, бо не бачила його, і ніхто його не бачив і не чув про нього все життя, окрім сліпої, що казала. Одне знаю, що то брат мій, від батька мого родився, а як він тепер? Не знаю. І хто сповістив йому, де я, не відаю. І, зустрівши її, промовив до неї, віриш, що я батьків син? Тоді та й сказала, вірую, брате, і поклонилася йому, обняла його і розридалася.
I think for the names, I will keep them closer in my reading to Ukrainian pronunciation. The book of the generation of Alexander. The son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. Jacob begot Judah and his brethren. Judah begot Phares and Zara by Tamar. And Phares begot Hezron, and Hezron begot Aram. Aram begot Aminadab. And Aminadab begot Naason. Naason begot Salmon. And Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth. And Obed begot Yesse. Yesse begot David. And David begot Lazer by Bathsheba, Burikova in Chortkiv. And Lazer begot Israel by Sarah in Akropos Святой Трійці. And when Baal Shem Tov was born, both his parents were 100 years old. And they had no other children beside him and died. When Best was 5, and he wandered around in the wild, searching for God to appease him. And having found him, Best begot Tzvi Hirsch and Adelia by Hannah Malka in Brody. And Adelia bore Feiga to Yehiel Ashkenazi from Tulchin. And they also had Moshe Chaim, Baruch Shmuel, and Yankel Yov. Feiga gave birth to Nachman in Medjibish. And Nachman out of Bratslav begot Adelia by Sasha Yefraimova. Adelia bore Avraham Dovber of Yoska Averbuch from Khmelnik. Avraham Dovber begot David in Chigirin. David begot Boruch by Libatovba from Medvedivka. And then Herz was born of Sosa Sura Aronova to Baruch and Bershat. And Herz begot David, Boruch, Rachilia, Sheina, and Zisля by Sima Binyaminova in Dashiv. And Rachilia bore Louisa Ludmila of Victor in Donetsk. And Victor had been fathered by Karl Oswood of the Mennonites in Novgorodsk. And Louisa Ludmila bore Natalia of Volodymyr Boguslavov from Krakow. And from Natalia there was born Alexander. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14. And from David until the Exodus to Ukraine and the great intermixing are 14 generations. Now, The birth of Alexander was on the wise. Even before his mother was espoused to Mikhailo from Novaya Dar, and before they came together, it had turned out that she carried Alexander in her womb, and Mikhailo, not being a righteous man, disgraced her. And he didn't take her as his wife because he didn't want Alexander conceived by him. Yet Natalia wanted to bring forth a son and call him by the name Alexander so that he would protect her and would not be a disgrace to her. And as she woke from her sleep, she did as she was commanded, and did not get rid of him, nor did she scrape him out. And Alexander knew, thanks to his mother, neither his father Mikhailo, born of Volodymyr, nor his grandmother Volodymyr, born of Konstantin, nor his grandmother Nina, born of Mykolai, nor his blind half-sister, never knew her, nor did he see her ever, that they lived in Rostov-on-Don's Yeremenko Street, 822, apartment 803, that every morning his father went to work. Alexander neither saw it nor knew of it, that his sister in dark shades went out arm in arm with a woman. Never had he seen them nor known them, and he asked himself, who had sinned, she or her father, that she was born blind? It was not she who had sinned, for she did not know what her father had done. Thus spoke he, and helped heal the blind woman. She went whither he had told her to go, and she returned sighted. The neighbors, therefore, and those who had seen that she was blind, said, isn't she the one who had been wearing dark shades? And she said, I am she. Therefore said they unto her, how were thine eyes opened? She answered and said, the man who called himself my brother came to my aid and said unto me, go there and do so. And I went there and did as he had ordered. Then said they unto her, where is he? She said, I know not, because I did not see him. And nobody had ever seen him or heard of him, except for the blind woman who said, I know only that he is my brother, begotten of my father. How he is now I do not know, nor who told him where to find me. Having met her, she said unto her, dost thou believe that I am the son of our father? She answered and said, I believe, brother. She bowed down before him, embraced him, and broke into tears.
Thank you so much. I think this was just beautiful to read and to consider in terms of the complications and kind of the interwovenness of the family tree, and and how it blossomed. We have only a couple of comments, so I invite if anyone would like to still ask a last-minute question to do so. In the meantime, I'm going to read the comments and invite both the author and the translators to respond. Okay, the first is from Alexei Launi, who says, to me, I occasionally reflect on the irony that nonfiction feels inaccessible and unbelievable, whereas fiction can be more accessible and believable. This collection had me considering how poetry can dance across the entire canvas by cleverly conveying truths. I'm curious if something similar was in Alex's thinking in his approach for this collection. And I'm so pleased to engage with this work after Alex's impressive exhibit at HURI last year on the correspondence of Ukrainian Ostrobyters.
Thank you. Well, the answer to the first question depends whether you consider it as a non-fiction or a fiction. I mean, this part of the collection, these poems that are claimed to be authentic documentary materials, but and they will continue to be authentic documentary materials arranged by Alex Averbuch until someone will find the originals and reveal that these are indeed authentic materials. So these poems are based on documentary materials. So I don't know whether you should treat it as nonfiction, which is inaccessible. Maybe this form of nonfiction that pretends to be fiction and poetry is very much accessible. And I know that this portion of the book colleagues teach in the lectures on the Second World War, forced labor, history of Ostarbeiters. The genre is ambiguous as well as the book, and as well as art itself, I guess.
Max or Oksana, would you like to comment?
We do not quite agree with this classification of things into fiction and non-fiction, especially if you go to any American library where you see fiction and then science fiction and then autobiographical fiction, all types of fiction. And then Gonza literature probably is partially fictional, but as well from a subjective perspective, it attains or attempts to speak truthfully about the time and context, about the unity of being in that time. So it's not really about fiction, non-fiction distinctions. It's just poetry that absorbs as much as possible and condenses it. Condensation is the logic.
Oksana?
I guess often it's a matter of personal preference, and often a matter of preferences that are shaped by various contextual forces. So there are periods when readers prefer fiction, there are contexts when readers prefer fiction, and then there are contexts where readers really want to know that something had been authentically and truly experienced by the person writing it, just as they're writing it, or something has been researched as historical facts. So it's, I think there is a kind of oscillation, and we used to inhabit this period of fiction loving for much of the 20th century, and now I think there is more of a turn in the direction of hybrid genres. And Alex's work is definitely making use of these new kinds of acceptances of hybridity and ambiguity. You don't really have to state in advance what it is that you're doing. You can be a genre-defying author, or you could be mixing things in interesting ways to problematize these often artificial preferential divisions.
Right, and obviously from the perspective of literature, right? The mixing of genres and the hybridity offers a lot of advantages to the voice, right? Because if it's rooted in a personal experience, it carries something else with it, right? So it's not the voice that is disembodied; it's very much an embodied voice. Max, did you want to add something else?
No, I think I've
Okay, so let me read another comment. This is from Reluca Golisteanu Jacobs. Unfortunately, I had to leave earlier, but I had been incredibly moved by the topic. I would also have a question about the German, Polish, Russian gaze from a historical and literary perspective, but I will ask Alex a later time. Thank you so much. And finally, one last comment, and I think it's very good to conclude this reading, this book launch today. It's from Marina Temkina, who says, huge thank you to Alex and all buying the book. It is very close to my heart and what I do in poetry. I invite you to also consider buying this book. It's available as beautiful print edition, as we just discussed, or also as digital editions. And maybe the concluding word to Alex before we say goodbye.
I think that I had a lot of thoughts before this session, and actually before every reading, I have many more thoughts than during the event. But I would like to conclude by this another acknowledgement of the translators and by my personal definition, and this is how I teach literature also, which is mostly in translation, that that translators and their work is not secondary to what was done by an author. It is a standalone creative work, and maybe one day, who knows? I am myself a translator. We will put the names of the translators before the name of the author. If until then this very category of author will exist, I do not perceive it seriously, and even without looking back at Roland Barthes' famous definitions. And so my huge thanks to Max and Oksana, to you, Oleh, who went with us through a very long but enriching experience, I believe, and you are the godfather of this book. And in general, this book has many family members, I guess. This is how I see it. And I am very much pleased by the fact that it was translated by a married couple. I think it adds something that I am not able to define now.
Thank you, Alex. And I also need to mention again that the design was prepared by Gilad Sutil, and it's really beautiful. And besides me, this collection was also edited by Grace Mahoney, and I'm also very grateful for her work. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Oksana. Thank you, Max. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. Please continue supporting our work. Please continue reading Ukrainian literature and supporting Ukraine. And using this occasion, I would like to invite you to our next event. Namely, it's already next week on Wednesday, May 13th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We will have a book launch and discussion of our next book, and it's a collection by Iya Kiva entitled Silence, Dressed in Cyrillic Letters, translated by Amelia Glazer and Yulia Ilchuk. And we will have a similar reading and discussion with the author and the translators. That will also be an online event, and so I invite all of you to join us. Don't miss this opportunity to engage directly with the author, with the translators, and let's continue this work together. Thank you, everyone.